It's a beautiful bacon day, Cookie Crusaders. Today I want to talk to you about the teams that I'm going to be trying when Oyster Cookie comes out. Now, obviously, I can't guarantee that I'll have a 5-star version of Oyster. It really depends on how we can go about getting Oyster Cookie, what the missions are, if it's an event style, if it's gotcha style. Not terribly sure just yet, but the teams I am considering putting Oyster in, I want to discuss, and I want to discuss why. So the first team, one of my favorite teams, is the T-Night team. I'm thinking about replacing Eclair Cookie with Oyster Cookie. Now here's the reason why. Eclair is already a rear support, so it's going to take the exact same position. So it won't mess up the skill lineup for the rest of my team that I have. In addition, Oyster Cookie, at least based on what information we've gotten, raises the crit damage and the crit percent of everybody. And if that is true, then that means that the critical damage that Crunchy Chip does, the critical damage that I'm already running on Dark Cacao, and the critical damage that can be done on T-Night will increase. And so that is very, very powerful. And so I'm very excited to see how that handles the meta and how that handles pushing through all the potential teams. And not only that, but Eclair right now can only send out a bolt against a specific amount of enemies and cast weakness, which that can be gotten rid of with monocles, and that can be gotten rid of with herb. And so for that reason, I want to make sure I have a switch out that gives me more tactical power and more defensive structure without necessarily compromising too many other things. So that's the first team I'm going to be trying. And I think that's going to be a really powerful team. Just potentially the extra units, the boost that's going to be going to Crunchy Chip, making Crunchy Chip already even stronger than he already is, which is going to be amazing. I think it's going to be a really powerful play. So I'm interested to see how it does and how it works. Team number 2 is the Summoner team. Now I'm going to be replacing Snow Sugar with Oyster Cookie. And I will test out replacing Wildberry with Oyster to try and do a full summon if that gives enough power and defense to Snow Sugar. Because the real problem is with Snow Sugar, unless you set up with a 51% damage resistance almond topping setup, Snow Sugar usually is going to be perishing. And you can mitigate that with a lot of defensive structure like Wildberry and Hollyberry, or 3 fronts like Hollyberry, Wildberry, Cacao, but you're setting up a lot of defense in hopes that Snow King is going to do the entire job. Now in the current meta, he just can't. In the other meta, Snow Sugar can hold against healing teams, against other summoning teams. Snow Sugar does really well and was a kind of a crux piece of the original Summoner team. So it's not that I don't want to use Snow Sugar, but I think that if I can't keep Snow alive by replacing Wildberry with Oyster, then I will be putting Oyster in Snow Sugar's place instead, so that I get the maximum amount of Summoner team prowess from the pin cushion and all the units that are going to be coming out. So I'm very excited to see that team and how it plays out, because it should be pretty strong. And then the last team that I'm thinking is probably going to actually be not one that I have here, but I'm thinking Oyster, Mushroom, Crunchy Chip, Caramel Arrow, and probably Mala. Because the reason is Mala and Caramel Arrow will take the front leads. Same with Crunchy Chip. Poison and Oyster will be in the back. A healing reduction will come from Poison. There should be enough defensive lineup to keep both Oyster and Poison alive, as well as the extra units that come out from Oyster. They will buff up Crunchy Chip, and then the critical damage up is going to be huge from Oyster and Mala, making it so that it is like a almost guaranteed critical hitting team, which means their damage should be through the roof. And with Poison doing amazing amounts from Mushroom, and just like I think that team might blend well together. I could sub in Affogato potentially to get like debuff increased, but it's not gonna really make a huge difference in comparison between those two. So I think that Poison Mushroom would probably lend itself better than Affogato in that situation. So that's something I'm going to consider and try as well. Now, what cookies do I think is the counter to Oyster Cookie? So obviously, Wildberry is a good starting point because all those extra units means that all the counter ticks on Wildberry are going to position up really quickly. Since they come out with shields, the Oyster minions, Dark Cacao and Twizzly, are going to be really important too. So definitely consider that. Another thing is the fact that the front line is going to be very heavily unit oriented. I think Sorbet is going to do a really good job. I think Blossom is going to make a huge comeback here in what we haven't seen because there's going to be so many units, and I'm almost sure that so many summoner comps are going to be running that Blossom should be able to get the full stacks of attack buff and some pretty strong damage on the field as well. So keep an eye out on Blossom. I think that that's a potential. Another one could be maybe Cream Puff for a healer, because with the problem with Parfait and Pomegranate and Pure Vanilla and even Cotton, you're not really hitting a lot of enemies. You're doing great damage to singular enemies, but not a lot. Cream Puff can do damage to a wave of enemies. And if there is a wave of summoned units, Cream Puff is going to be hitting all of them. So that means Cream Puff's damage is going to be stacking very quickly, and at least the stat results accordingly. So I have my eyes on Cream Puff for that reason too. And then, of course, the speed team with Madeline Cookie. I think that's going to be a really important thing as well. Madeline can get into those ranged attacks and hits every single creature and Cookie. And so I think that that's going to be really important. In addition, Sea Fairy might kind of fall in that same region. Problem is it only targets 5. So unless it's specifically you setting up a scam team to push the summoners together, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work. So that's an iffy in my mind. And I think Red Velvet might be a really good bring back because Red Velvet might be able to pull Oyster up for us so that we can take Oyster out as quick as possible. So that should be some interesting teams to see. These are just my predictions, of course. We'll see in about, on the 14th, the moment that we can unlock Oyster Cookie, I'm going full steam. Gonna do everything I can to get Oyster and at least show you the teams that I'm putting together and my thoughts as I am saying today and see how they play out. I love your feedback. I love your opinion in the comments. Are there specific teams that you want to run? Are there only certain modes that you're going to use Oyster Cookie in? Are you going to try and max Oyster Cookie? I'd love to hear everything. Either way, thank you so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful day.